There's so many runners who have knee pain, ankle pain, IT band syndrome, and the number one thing that we found that runners don't work on is the running form. I mean, so many runners know that strength training is important. So many of them know that mobility is important, but we never focus on running form. And it's the number one thing that you can do to improve how fast you're moving, your times, marathon times, 5K times, but also become a bulletproof runner and absolutely kill and crush any other running goals that you have. So our goal is we're gonna go over some of the more common running form impairments, and then also go over what they are and teach you how to treat these things on your own so you can start the process of becoming a bulletproof runner. The most common running form impairment that we see hands down is overstriding. And there's a little bit of confusion, I think, in the running world of what this is, but essentially it is when you are running, if you are landing way too out in front of your center of mass. So my center of mass is here, I'm landing way out in front here, and that is what we classify as overstriding. And the problem with that is if you overstride, you end up just working way too hard. When you take this big step way out here, the ground actually pushes back at you, you load your body way too much, and it's just a recipe for disaster for having longevity as a distance runner. So the most common running form impairment we see hands down, it's overstriding, and there's a couple different reasons why this could be happening. I mean, it could be from running form, it could be from strength and mobility, but there's a lot of reasons why it happens. But I mean, hands down, overstriding, number one thing you should be working on and addressing if you're going to improve your running form. So overstriding can be caused by a couple different things, and one of the most common is, it's what a lot of runners have, and that is hip tightness and just hip stiffness in the front. So think of it this way, if your hips in the front are stiff, it's gonna be challenging to get your leg behind you. So what we end up doing is, if we can't extend we call this hip extension, if we can't get our leg behind us, we'll end up actually making up for it and just taking a way too big of a step out in front of us. And I guess another way to think about this is like there's a pendulum motion of your leg. And if you aren't blocked going behind you, you're going to make up for it by swinging more forward. So we see so many runners, especially those who maybe they work in IT, they work a desk job, or they sit a lot. Maybe they're a police officer in their car, patrol car all the time, and these hips just get really, really stiff on us. Could be the muscles, could be other connective tissue, but we get stiffness in our hips, and this forces our leg to actually want to land more out in front versus landing more underneath us and actually using our powerful glutes when we're running. So it's a double whammy of, man, your hips are tight. It's gonna be very challenging to use our glutes. All right, guys, so these are the fixes. So for hip mobility, this is called a hip opener. You're gonna grab a strong monster band, wrap it around your hip, right underneath your glutes, and you are squeezing your butt as you lunge into this, holding a couple seconds, going for around 2 minutes. Next one we have is a glute thrust. I love loading this up, but if you're new to this, you just focus on squeezing your glutes at the top, but feel free, use a heavy dumbbell, use a barbell, and you can load this up a lot. But first of all, do a set of 20, really get those glutes active and squeeze at the top. The third one of my personal favorites, is a psoas release. Grab a lacrosse ball, grab whatever kind of mobilization ball you have. You're gonna lay on it right on your lower abdomen off to the side. See what you find, anything tender. Again, spending 1.5 to 2 minutes on this. And the last one is a forward lean drill against the wall. You're leaning from the ankles. Keep your core engaged and just practice leaning into this wall, falling forwards, and then returning back. The second running form impairment that we see a lot of, it's called a glute amnesiac. And it's kind of just like the word says, amnesia of the glutes. Well, not exactly, but there's a couple different reasons why a runner will be running and they're just not activating and utilizing their glute max, which by the way is the most powerful muscle in your body. So runners should be utilizing this muscle, but there's a couple different reasons why it might not be active for them. The glute amnesiac is a runner, it's classically characterized as they're very tall, they're very straight when they're running, or they're really lean back, almost like they're kind of like leaning back when they run. We call it running on your butt. It's kind of a funny name, but these runners they're really lean back, or they're very vertical when they're running. And the reason for that is, with running, it's a repeated single leg hop. followed by a fall. And if runners are not able to fall, if they're not comfortable letting gravity move them, they'll sit back because they're afraid of that feeling of falling. So these runners really need to learn how to be comfortable falling forwards, because they're really overworking on the back and pushing themselves, or trying to push themselves, because they're not comfortable falling, so they stay really upright. And that's generally what this glute amnesiac will look like. Is, man, they're really tall, they're swayed back, and they're not comfortable letting gravity move them at all. So the common causes of a glute amnesiac running style is actually very similar to overstriding, just presents a different way. So just like overstriders, glute amnesiacs tend to have more tightness in the front of their hips, and this can limit how much of this hip extension we have behind ourselves. Again, that glute is not turned on, so hip tightness can be a massive reason for someone who's a glute amnesiac. And you probably already guessed it, number two, the glutes are not firing the right way. So hips are tight, the glutes are not firing at all, they're not strong enough. And the third reason, we already mentioned it a little bit, but these are runners who are just not comfortable letting gravity move them, so they stay upright. And maybe they're an older runner and they've had a fall before, and that's totally understandable. But as runners, we have to be comfortable being able to lean forwards and fall forwards. And because if we don't, we're really gonna overwork ourselves. Let gravity move us, it helps us run efficiently. Just like the overstrider, we have the hip opener, which you're grabbing that strong monster band, wrapping it just underneath your glutes, and you're lunging and thrusting into this, holding a couple seconds, in and out for around 2 minutes. The next one, this is where we're really practicing falling forwards. This is we call this a wall drill, where you're leaning into the wall and going over these heel pulls, but getting comfortable, letting gravity, feeling the pull of gravity as you're going through these drills. The third one is a hip thrust. Getting that glute active is going to be super, super important. Again, thrusting up, holding 20 seconds at the top, and then once you're comfortable, really, really loading this up. And last but not least, we have a glute release. So laying on a lacrosse ball, just getting that glute all over the place, releasing it, because a lot of runners, this glute is just all scarred up and not really functioning. The third running form impairment that we see a lot of is a collapser. And this one can be a little bit complicated because there's a lot of different parts that can actually collapse. Could be your shoulder and your body's collapsing. Could be your hip is dropping, your knees caving in, your ankle and foot are overpronating. But the fact is, if you see something collapsing and moving in excessively, the hip drop, the knee caving in, that is what we classify as a runner who has these collapsing mechanics. So some of the causes of a collapsing running pattern are just, number one is weakness, especially in the hips, in the glute max, the glute medius. There's more to it than that, but we tend to see a lot of runners that have weakness in their hips. That knee tends to dive in more, that hip tends to drop more. So we can improve some strength on these muscles. That's a big thing we can work on. If you're collapsing down, man, let's start working on your glutes, working on your glute medius, and getting some more strength and power in the hips. Second reason is runners who just might lack some motor control. And all we mean by this is essentially your brain-body connection of what is your foot doing, what's your knee and hip doing when you're hitting the ground. We find that collapsers respond really, really well to verbal cues and just, hey, pretend you're running with there's a softball between your knees. And then that allows the runner to think, oh man, maybe I should not let my knees cave in because there's a softball between them. So we find that runners who are collapsing respond very, very well to these verbal cues of, hey, pretend your hip's a soup bowl, don't let your hip drop. That we're gonna cover in a second, but motor control is huge with runners who are collapsing, and just bringing some awareness and doing exercises to improve this. I mean, these runners tend to have really, really quick and effective improvements in their collapsing running form mechanics. All right, number one exercise for collapsing is the hip hike. Grab a Swiss ball. If you don't have this, grab a couple pillows, but you're hiking that hip up into the ball or the pillows, making sure you are using that side of the hip. You do not want to feel your low back pump on this. It's all the side of the hip. The second one is a single leg squat with the band. We are not trying to get deep here. Feel free to hold a weight, but that band is trying to cave your knee in and you are really resisting using that glute to fight the band. The next one is a banded hip abduction on one leg. Works balance, which is great, but we're really focusing on standing on one leg and again, working that hip abductor. And then we have a glute medius release, super simple, laying on that ball, hitting that glute medius, 2 minutes here. And last but not least, we have a Bulgarian split squat, my favorite for just strengthening the glute and also making sure that knee is not caving in. The fourth impairment that we find with runners is, it's called weaving. An easier name for this, or just a more simple name, is scissoring with your legs and your feet, where a runner is really crossing over their midline excessively. Now, crossing over a little bit is fine, especially when you start running faster. We tend to get a little more narrow of a base of support, but if you're crossing over excessively, that could be a problem, and you can really strain and stress muscles like your glute medius, like a lot of the bursas on the side of your hip here. They do not like that at all. You can cause a lot of hip issues if you're really excessively crossing over. So the causes of a weaving and a crossing over running pattern, again, could be a lot of different things. Some of the more common ones are stiffness in this glute medius muscle in the groin, where this leg ends up just kind of excessively getting crossed over. And actually hip flexion, a little bit of weakness here. If someone's just dragging their leg around, we can see it kind of swings and swings out this way. But one of the more common reasons is runners who lack controlling their core and rotation, they lack a lot of awareness in their lower extremities. So we'll see a lot more of this, not knowing where our feet are in place, especially just sometimes they cross over, sometimes they don't cross over, where we lack a lot of rotational, what we call capacity and strength. And we just see a lot of runners just not knowing where their legs are in space and getting their core stronger and controlling rotation and being more mobile in the rotation. We see they tend to cross over a lot less if we get them rotating and controlling this rotation through their core a lot better. So for the crossing over running pattern, we have a glute medius release. Super simple. You're laying on that lacrosse ball, spending around 1.5 to 2 minutes, releasing that glute medius muscle. The next one is a groin release. So we're using a kettlebell, draping our leg over top of it, getting up close and personal with the bell, and just working out any tender spots that you have. The next one is a counter rotation, hands down one of my favorite exercises for running, where we are slowly dropping our legs from side to side, controlling this motion. Make sure you feel the core. And next one, we have a Copenhagen plank with the knees bent. I start here. If you're strong enough, hey, straighten that leg out, totally cool, but we're going all the way up and down to really strengthen that groin that so many runners are missing. And the last one we have is a hip hike against the wall, strengthening that glute muscle. All right, number 5, we have a bouncing running form pattern. And for this one, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's runners who have way too much vertical oscillation versus having this horizontal motion, which is, we want a little bit more horizontal than vertical for sure. We do need a little bit of bouncing, but what we tend to find with these runners are they're very, very bouncy. And as you can imagine, you're just wasting way too much energy being too vertical. There's a sweet spot we want to hit. And if you are too vertical, you're too bouncy, you're gonna have a hard time running. Some of the common causes of this excessively bouncing running pattern that we tend to find are a lot of ankle mobility problems. So if your ankle joint is stiff, if the calf itself, if there's scar tissue in it, if the muscles are shortened, what we find is we see a lot of runners who just, because they don't have the ankle mobility to get into this strided position with the leg behind us, they actually end up pushing off early. And this early push off, it's not going to push us forwards. Most of the time it pushes us up in the air, and we have this excessively oscillating running pattern. So calf and ankle mobility is a massive reason for a runner who's really, really bouncy. So working on some ankle mobility and calf mobility is paramount if you have a bouncing running form pattern. Another reason why you might be bouncing and excessively bouncing up and down could be stiffness in your hips. If you haven't noticed by now, there's a pattern of, if you have stiff hips, you're gonna have a problem when you run. So if your hips are stiff and you cannot get your leg behind you, What we end up seeing is sometimes, if you can't get the leg back here, we will again push off early, a lot of times overusing our calf muscle and our ankle, and this early push off, instead of pushing us forwards, will excessively push us upwards and we'll have this excessive vertical oscillation. So if you haven't learned anything from this yet, man, it is if you can get your hips more mobile and get more of this leg behind you motion, it's only gonna help you when you run. So bouncing, stiff ankle, stiff calf, and if your hips are stiff, that could cause your bouncing. Here are some great exercises if you are bouncing. Number one is we want to work on ankle and calf mobility. This is a calf smash utilizing a lacrosse ball. Anything that's tender on your calf, hit it, ankle up and down for 2 minutes. The next one is an ankle release. Make sure this band is anchored lower than what your ankle is. The band goes right in your ankle crease and you are driving your knee forwards, backing off for 2 minutes. The third one is this hip extension mobilization with the band. So you want the band right underneath your glutes. You're driving your hips forward, squeezing your butt, holding a couple seconds, again, holding for 2 minutes. One of my favorite cues for these runners is imagining you are running on eggshells, because if you're trying to imagine you're not gonna break the eggshells when you're running, really helps decrease the bouncing. And last but not least, one of my favorites, the hip thrust. Get that glute a little bit more active and stronger as we improve that hip mobility. The last running form of impairment that we see a lot of is called underpulling. And this is where a runner is really just, they're just kind of kicking their leg through and they're leaving their heel really, really low instead of using their hamstrings and pulling the heel up. And there's a sweet spot you want to be at. As you run faster, we'll tend to see a higher heel pull. If you run slower, you see a little bit of a lower heel pull, but the point is we want to be at a sweet spot depending on how fast we are, and most runners are well below that sweet spot, and they kind of sweep their leg through and kick their leg through versus using their hamstrings and pulling this heel towards their glute, pull right underneath their center of mass, and it actually helps with all of the other running form impairments. If we can get this heel pull on point, it helps everything. The causes of underpulling, of a low heel pull, there a lot of times, most of the time, it is just from, hey, just not knowing how to effectively perform the heel pull. There's a sweet spot you want to be at. Most runners are well below that, but most runners just have never went over the marching drills, went over the drills to learn how to effectively heel pull. And it's a lot of just not knowing how to do this heel pull, but also just the hamstrings could be weak, they could be inactive. It's a lot of hamstring work doing these heel pulls, which is one of the most used muscles when running. It's the hamstrings and the calves, so getting your hamstrings more active, stronger, building that mind-body connection between them. We call this neuromuscular connection. It's gonna be huge in order to get your heel pull to where it needs to be. Here are some exercises to work on your underpulling. Number one is a hamstring curl, very simple exercise. Grab your Swiss ball, you're just squeezing your glutes, curling the ball towards you, slowly coming back down, feeling the burn in your hamstrings. The next one, this is my favorite one to work on underpulling, is we call it a heel pull on the box. So you are going through this single leg hop, but every time you hop, you're pulling the heel under your body. You should really feel that hamstring working. And the next one is a marching drill. Start out slow, progress on going a little bit faster here, faster heel pull, but really focusing on using the hamstring, pulling the heel under your body, under your glutes. The second one is a progression of this marching drill. Starting to move forwards, going a little bit faster. And the last one here is where the marching drill where we're single leg hopping, getting this heel pull, and then we are falling forwards into our run. So if you're interested in working with us and you've been following our content for a while and you really want to solve your problem, you can hop on a call with myself, with CC, one of our other movement experts, and we can really find out what you have going on and how we can help you going forwards. I'm Matt from Alpha Project, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon.